Joe. Thank you so much for joining the program.
You bet, Matthew. My pleasure.
Absolutely. So let's start with this. If you could just first kind of lay this out for us who haven't been following the trial that closely. What's been going on in Austin these past couple weeks? And what exactly is Attorney General Ken Paxton being accused of in this impeachment trial?
Well, Matthew, he was impeached by the Texas House by a wide margin Memorial Day weekend. And the Senate pretty promptly thereafter set his impeachment trial the day after Labor Day. So I've been calling it Ken Paxton's hot summer of impeachment. And so over the last couple of weeks, the parties have been preparing for trial, which did begin Tuesday, September 5th. And we've had 4 full days of trial. The pretrial motions were all decided in the House Board of Managers' favor and against Ken Paxton. And then, Matthew, we've had 4 witnesses, all whistleblowers, who have been on the stand and cross-examined by Paxton's lawyers. And that's where we are in the first weekend break.
So you ran to be the candidate that would go against Paxton in 2022. You ran in the Democratic primary. Can I take that to assume that you think he's guilty of the crimes he's accused of?
Well, I do. I mean, and I believe that he should not be, inhabiting the prestigious and consequential office of Texas Attorney General due to his failure to fit the proper profile of what an attorney general should be. I mean, Democrats have been saying this, Matthew, ever since he's been elected. And it's only been in the recent months that the Republicans agreed with us. But yeah, he is not fit for office. And that's been clear to me for a long time. And now we're going to get the ultimate decision in the impeachment trial on a political level.
That kind of segues perfectly into my next question, because, of course, Democrats have kind of been raising alarm bells about Paxton for a long time. Since he's been in office, he's been accused of at least one crime the whole time he's been in office. I wonder why now for the Republicans? We know it was the majority Republican Texas House that impeached him. So why now?
Sure. I mean, you're referring to the securities fraud indictment from 2015, shortly after he was sworn in as Attorney General in January 2015. And Paxton always maintained that was simply a political hit job by certain members of his party. But he is going to face a criminal trial, I mean, with prison as a possible consequence in Harris County. But that was 8 years ago he was indicted. Your question is, why now? Why, after all that time and all these complaints, are Republicans finally joining with Democrats to impeach him in the Texas House? It boils down to a series of events that started in 2018, escalated in 2019, and then reached an apex in 2020, where handpicked lieutenants within the Texas Attorney General's office became increasingly aware that Ken Paxton was using the awesome powers of the Office of Attorney General to benefit one individual by the name of Nate Paul, and 8 of the lieutenants, 4 who became lawsuit whistleblowers, and all 8 who complained to the FBI, finally had it enough of it. And after literally 12 to 18 months of pleading with their boss to quit affiliating with this fellow Nate Paul and turning over the powers of the office to benefit Nate Paul and his ridiculous, ludicrous conspiracy theories, they finally turned him in. Ken Paxton promptly fired them all. They then filed a lawsuit, Matthew, which wended its way to the Supreme Court over a 2-year period. All the while, Ken Paxton was deriding the value of the case, saying it was meritless. But then suddenly, at the beginning of 2023, he settles it for full value, $3.3 million, and sticks the bill squarely on the desk of the Texas House and asks the legislature to pay for his conduct.
And I think it's generally agreed upon that the Texas Senate is a bit more conservative than the Texas House. Do we think it's even a realistic possibility that the Texas Senate will vote to convict one of their own?
It's definitely a possibility, but it's not a sure thing. And so you have to look at the numbers. As you know, there's 31 senators, but one of them is Paxton's wife. And so she's been recused, even though she wouldn't do it voluntarily her colleagues did it for her. But her physical presence is there. She just has to watch and say nothing. She's also counted for purposes of the math of determining a 2/3 majority to convict and remove out of a body of 31. So, Matthew, we need 21 votes, 12 Democrats. There are 19 Republicans, and with Angela recused, 18. So 12 plus 9 makes 21. So we need half of the 18. Interestingly, the motions to dismiss required a voice vote from each senator, and there were 16 of them. 15 of the 16 were denied by margins that would qualify as a margin to sustain conviction. Only one had 10 countervotes. So, I'm here to tell you that it's very possible he'll be convicted. Also, the weight of the evidence is extreme. It's damning. For example, the last witness to take the stand Friday was David Maxwell, former Texas Ranger. And I would just ask your listeners to consider that if a movie's ever made of this, Tommy Lee Jones will clearly play David Maxwell. And it was that level of gravitas. And Maxwell was not to be shaken off his position. It was powerful testimony.
And of course, all the senators are there, including Paxton's wife, State Senator Angela Paxton. But Paxton himself is not there. What's the story behind that? Why he hasn't been showing up for days 1 through 4? Or I guess he was there at the beginning of day 1 and he hasn't been there since. What's the story with that?
Yeah, it's a profile in cowardice, the fact that he won't attend his trial. I mean, Matthew, I ask your listeners, if you had a lawsuit filed against you seeking to end your career, wouldn't you take care to attend and know every minute of what's going on? But this is just like Ken Paxton. Over the course of his time as Attorney General, he has never debated his opponents. He never appears for media interviews other than, Steve Bannon's War Room or Newsmax, a comfy, little homey environment for him and his way of seeing the world. He fires people, not personally, but through subordinates. And finally, in the most consequential moment of his political life, he leaves his wife to attend alone. And apparently, even though he's suspended from office and literally has nothing else to do, he's watching from his living room.
And I was going to ask you what moments from days 1 through 4 have stood out to you as moments that would possibly influence the jurors, the senators. But it kind of sounded like that the moment for you was the testimony of former Texas Ranger David Maxwell, who was one of the whistleblowers. Yeah,
let me elaborate on that. I mean, again, we've had 4 live witnesses, and in terms of impact, I would rank them. I mean, people might have a different viewpoint, but I would rank them in terms of importance to the House Board of Managers case: David Maxwell, and then Jeff Mateer, Ryan Bangert, and then finally Ryan Vassar. But I do think that the way the structure of the case has been made is part of what I'm referring to. In other words, Mateer went first, Bangert second, Ryan Vassar third, and I think most would agree that Ryan Vassar was subjected to a withering cross-examination by Mitch Little, one of the Paxton lawyers, and it was tough. And I mean, he hung in there. He didn't fall apart or anything, but it was very hard to listen to him. His personality was very sincere, but also very quiet, and Mitch Little sort of overpowered him if you look at the fireworks aspect of cross-examination. But what followed then was a change in lawyers, because Rusty Hardin, Matthew, had the first 3 prosecution witnesses. And so here comes David Maxwell, the former Texas Ranger Hall of Famer, wearing the white hat, and Dick DeGuerin does the direct examination. And so I think the contrast was masterful and significant. Maxwell is, a very skilled testifier, because as a law enforcement officer for 48 years, he's put a lot of people in prison. And when you think about who the jury is, the Texas Senate, and really who the lawyers are playing to, which are Republican senators who are willing to do right and risk the consequences. Those are the people who are the swing votes. The Democrats, I would imagine, have had quite enough of Ken Paxton. There are certain Republicans who will stick by him through thick or thin, but the swing votes had to have been impacted by Texas Ranger David Maxwell's testimony.
One of the things that stood out to me about his testimony was some of the questions he got from Paxton's lawyer, Dan Cogdell. There was like a strategy there where he started off like overly deferential, Ranger this, Ranger that, you're a Hall of Famer, et cetera, et cetera. And by the end, he was kind of barking at him like a drill sergeant. I wonder, as a fellow lawyer, did you see like a sort of strategy there from Cogdell? What was he trying to do there?
Well, I mean, certainly Dan Cogdell deserves to be in a Hall of Fame of criminal defense lawyers for sure. But it had to have been a hard task for him because, he's not trying this case in front of a Harris County district jury or a Travis County district jury. He's, trying it in front of elected Texas senators who, again, for the swing vote are, quote, tough on crime and, back the blue and all those political considerations. So it's hard to tell whether Cogdell's switch from deferential, as you said, and you're right, to more of an attack was intentional or more out of frustration. They know each other, Maxwell and Cogdell. I don't know if you probably picked up on the history of them in Waco. I think they were there both together for the Branch Davidian incident. But if they've known each other that long, then they've got to have a history. But I just don't think Cogdell was in a position to do anything other than challenge Maxwell. And I think Maxwell kind of had the voice of God thing going, which is, it didn't take me long at all to determine Nate Paul as a criminal. I took care to tell Ken Paxton this unequivocally. Ken Paxton said, no, you're going to do this, whether you like it or not. I met with him 3 times, Nate Paul. Ranger Maxwell recorded the first 2 meetings, and then the 3rd meeting, Ken Paxton forbade him from recording it and then fired Maxwell despite attorney generals historically taking the advice, unless there's real good cause not to, of their 8th floor lieutenants. The 8th floor of the Clements building is where the C-suite is, if you will, of the attorney general's office. So I think the evidence was powerful. Again, we're not talking about, uneducated jurors who don't know anything about politics. These are the Texas senators of our state who are sitting in judgment. And I think the evidence went right to the heart of the matter.
I wonder if you have any opinions on how Dan Patrick is doing overseeing the trial. For me personally, as someone who doesn't have a real understanding of courtroom law, it's felt like some of his, sustaining and overruling objections has felt kind of subjective to me. Like maybe he doesn't have a real understanding of it. What do you make of that?
Look, I'm going to give him an A+ for conducting a tight court. I mean, he would make federal judges proud of his starting on time and keeping lawyers, and jurors, to a schedule. And that's important, I think, because, I'm sure the senators appreciate it because they have to be coming back in October, obviously, for a special session that's going to be highly contentious. But for this limited period of their life, Dan Patrick is in full control. I do agree that, he'll be the first to admit he's not a judge or a lawyer. So every now and then he will, I think he believes, in good faith, he's got a good handle on what is hearsay and, what is objectionable and what is not. And sometimes he does not obviously take a moment to consult with the Court of Appeals justice that he hired. Is it Lana Hughes, I want to say. But sometimes he'll just sort of rule on the objection personally. And I think, he's probably batting about, 500 on that.
That's just watching it from my perspective. It feels like, if he's done 3 sustains, he's going to overrule 1 and back and forth. Like, he doesn't want to do 5 in a row of 1.
Right. He may be smarter than all of us, just kind of, King Solomon, on balance, kind of giving each side their due.
Mm-hmm. And as we start to wrap this up, I wonder, what are your expectations, not only for the second week of the impeachment trial, but the whole thing as it marches toward its conclusion?
Sure. I think everyone was surprised after lunch on Friday, day 4, when Dan Patrick revealed sort of the timing, like, here's how much hours are left. And I believe he said one side had roughly 16 hours left and one side had 15 hours and change. And so that obviously tells you that cross-examination, done by Paxton's side is going against their 24 hours. And likewise, the direct testimony of the 4 witnesses has taken, a good chunk. I think we're pretty close to the halfway point, Matthew, and certainly by Monday at lunch, we will have to have been at the halfway point. And so at some point, I think the board of managers are going to have to make a reasonable guess whether Paxton's side is going to even call any witnesses. Because, when you get down past 10 hours left and then 5 hours left, do you want to save some time to cross-examine the other side? I mean, Paxton's not going to testify. So I don't know really who will on the Paxton side. It may be they take the position that, hey, you haven't proven your case, so we rest, but their time is wasting away as they cross-examine. So everyone's going to probably be a little more clipped and efficient as we go into week 2. I think it's possible that we will be done with each case in chief by Thursday afternoon. It's possible that we will have rebuttal witnesses Friday and closing arguments Friday. It is possible that the senators will deliberate and have a verdict as early as Monday the 18th.
And I'll close with this. Did Texans lose anything by having an impeached attorney general who's constantly under investigation?
Yes. For someone who claims they're supporting the rule of law, you could have fooled me. This guy is a distraction in the extreme. And while I am a Democrat, there's a whole bunch of variations of being a Democrat in Texas, just like apparently there are being a Republican, because what we're about to see out of this impeachment trial, whichever way the verdict goes, is a civil war in the Republican Party. It's already underway. It's no surprise. And, certainly the House members who voted to impeach all have targets on their back, from Defend Texas Liberty and Jonathan Stickland and that whole crowd. And they're openly threatening the jurors, the senators who may be thinking about voting to convict. That alone costs Texas. But the fact that our attorney general is such a distraction, and I just don't think any other reasonable professional in government can take him seriously. I mean, can you imagine going to court, Matthew, and some, lifelong jurist, is there sitting in decision-making mode, and your lawyer were to turn to you and go, hey, look, I'm under indictment and I've been impeached and, all these things, but don't worry, I got this. I think we'd all be really concerned about that.
It doesn't sound ideal. And with that, that is Joe Jaworski, former mayor of Galveston and a former candidate for Texas Attorney General. Joe, thank you so much for joining the program.
My pleasure, Matthew. Thank you.